The scent of wild sage and crushed grass carries on a wind that has travelled 1,000 miles without hitting a single wall, a wind that knows the secrets of the high places where the earth meets the heavens. Long before the world knew the name of the great Khan, there was only the sound of this wind whistling through the tall stalks of the Mongolian plateau, a vast and rolling sea of green and gold that seems to stretch into eternity. To stand in the centre of this world is to feel small, yet strangely connected to everything, as the horizon pulls the eyes toward a distance that never truly ends. Above this landscape sits the eternal blue sky, known to the nomadic people as Tengri, a deity not of stone temples or written prayers, but of the infinite, shimmering atmosphere that watches over every living creature with a cold and beautiful indifference. The nomads of the 12th century lived in the palm of Tengri's hand, moving their circular felt tents, the gers, across the plains in a rhythm as old as the seasons. They did not seek to conquer the land, for one does not conquer the wind or the frost. Instead, they sought to harmonize with it, following the migrations of the herds and the melting of the mountain snows. Their history was not written in books, but whispered in the smoke of dung fires and sung in the long, low chants of the elders. They spoke of their origins with a deep, mystical reverence, tracing their lineage back to a time when the world was young, and the veil between the animal and human spirits was thin. They believed they were the children of the blue-grey wolf, a creature of fierce intelligence and divine origin, and the fallow deer, who represented the grace and endurance of the earth itself. From this union of predator and prey, of strength and gentleness, the Mongol people were born, a people destined to survive in a place where the winter temperatures could crack the very stones and the summer sun could wither the strongest blade of grass. Life on the steppe was a constant cycle of movement and preparation. Every man, woman and child was a part of the great machine of survival, learning to ride almost before they could walk, their legs curving to fit the bellies of their sturdy, shaggy ponies. As the evening settles in and you find a comfortable position beneath your blankets, perhaps you can imagine the quiet of a Mongol camp at twilight, the soft lowing of the sheep, the distant bark of a mastiff, and the crackle of a fire as the stars begin to pierce through the darkening veil of Tengri. If you are joining us tonight to find rest, and perhaps learn a little of the past, you are most welcome here at the Slumber Archives. We gather here every single day to share new stories from the long tapestry of human history, woven into narrations designed to help you drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. If you find these journeys through time comforting, please consider subscribing so we can meet here again tomorrow night, and perhaps leave a like to help other weary travelers find their way to our fireside. In the year 1162, as the bitter winds of the north began to soften with the coming of spring, a child was born near the banks of the Onon River. This was a land of silver birches and clear, cold water, a place where the mountains of the north began to give way to the rolling hills of the central plains. The boy's father was Yesuge, a chieftain of the Borjigin clan, a man of standing who had proven his courage in the endless skirmishes between the local tribes. His mother was Huelun, a woman of remarkable strength who had been taken in a raid, as was the harsh custom of the time, yet who would become the bedrock of her son's existence. When the infant was brought into the light of the ger, the midwives and the elders noticed something extraordinary, something that caused a ripple of hushed whispers to travel through the camp. Clutched tightly in the tiny closed fist of the newborn was a clot of blood, the size of a knuckle bone, dark and glistening like a polished stone of jasper. To the people of the steppe, who looked for signs in the flight of hawks and the patterns of cracked shoulder blades in the fire, this was no mere accident of birth. It was an omen, a physical manifestation of a destiny that would be forged in iron and blood. They named the boy Temujin, after a Tartar chieftain whom his father had recently defeated, perhaps hoping to grant the child the strength of a fallen enemy. As Temujin grew, he breathed the air of a fractured world. The Mongolia of the 12th century was not a nation, but a chaotic mosaic of rival tribes, the Merkits, the Naimans, the Kerites, and the Tatars, all of them locked in a perpetual cycle of horse raiding and blood feuds. There was no central law, only the code of the steppe, where loyalty to one's kin was the only protection against the vast, empty silence of the wilderness. A man's wealth was measured in horses and the number of bowmen he could call to his side, and alliances were as shifting as the shadows cast by the clouds across the grass. The young Temujin learned early that the infinite blue sky provided for those who were resilient, but showed no mercy to the weak. He watched his father navigate the complex politics of the tribes, learning how to speak with the measured tone of a leader and how to read the intentions of a guest by the way they held their cup. He spent his days in the saddle, feeling the rhythmic thud of hooves against the earth, a sound that would eventually become the heartbeat of an empire. He learned to use the composite bow, a masterpiece of sinew, horn and wood, that could send an arrow whistling through the air with enough force to pierce armor, yet required a steady hand and a calm mind to master. But despite the looming shadows of war and the harsh demands of nomadic life, there were moments of profound peace in Temujin's childhood. There were the long summer afternoons when the grass grew waist-high and smelled of honey and sun-warmed earth. There were the nights spent listening to the epic poems of ancestors who had once crossed the great deserts to the south. In those moments, under the watchful gaze of Tengri, the boy was simply a part of the landscape, a small figure in a world of giants. He did not yet know that he would one day unite these scattered, warring tribes into a force that would shake the foundations of the world, that he would become the Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. For now he was only a child of the wolf and the deer, sleeping soundly in a felt tent, while the wind sang its ancient song outside, unaware that the blood clot in his hand was the first spark of a fire that would burn across continents. The scent of bitter herbs and the metallic tang of a dying fire hung heavy in the air of the family yurt on the day the world first broke for young Temujin. It was a betrayal carried on the wings of a false hospitality, a cup of poisoned food offered to his father, Yesugei, by the rival Tatars as he journeyed homeward. When the great warrior finally succumbed to the toxin, falling silent forever beneath the vast, indifferent sky, the fragile structure of their lives collapsed with the speed of a summer storm. The Taichi Ud clan, those who had once pledged their loyalty and shared their meat with Yesugei's family, looked upon the widow Hoelun and her small children not with compassion, but with a cold, calculating eye. They saw only mouths to feed and a lineage they no longer wished to support. As the morning mist clung to the tall grasses of the steppe, the clan began to pack their belongings, their wagons creaking and their horses stamping in the cold air. Hoelun, a woman of iron will and fierce grace, realized with a sinking heart that they were being left behind. She seized the white spirit banner of her husband, galloping after the departing tribe, pleading for them to honor their bonds of kinship, but they turned their backs on her. They drove the livestock away, leaving the widow and her 7 children with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the bitter wind of the Onon River valley. The silence that followed the departure of the clan was absolute, a silence that meant the difference between life and death in a land where survival was a collective effort. And so, the family was cast into the deep shadows of the wilderness, forced to become shadows themselves among the birches and the pines. The transition from the children of a powerful chieftain to hunted scavengers was swift and brutal. Temujin, once destined for a life of command, now spent his days with his fingers buried in the freezing mud of the riverbanks, digging for the small, bitter roots of the wild leek and the lily. They learned the quiet language of the forest, moving with a soft step to avoid the notice of predators, both animal and human. On the days when the roots were scarce, they turned to the river, crafting makeshift hooks to pull small fish from the icy currents, or hunting the marmots and ground squirrels that scurried through the undergrowth. Hoelun was the anchor that held them together during these lean years, her voice a steady murmur in the dark of their small makeshift shelter. She taught them that the mind must be sharper than the blade when the stomach is empty. She told them stories of their ancestors to keep their spirits from flickering out like a dying ember. Yet as the seasons turned and the children grew taller and more hollow-cheeked, a different kind of darkness began to take root within their small circle. It was the friction of survival, the sharpening of tempers against the whetstone of hunger. Temujin, though young, felt the heavy, invisible mantle of leadership pressing down upon his shoulders, but it was a weight he shared uneasily with his older half-brother, Bekta. The rivalry between the two boys grew in the quiet spaces of the forest, fueled by the scarcity of their world. A stolen fish, a disputed kill, a look of defiance. These small things became mountains in the landscape of their struggle. Bekta, being older and stronger, began to assert a dominance that Temujin found intolerable. To Temujin, this was not merely a sibling squabble. It was a matter of order and the survival of the family unit. He saw in Bekta a threat to the unity his mother worked so hard to maintain. One afternoon, under a sky the color of bruised plums, the tension finally broke. Along with his brother Kasar, the gifted archer, Temujin tracked Bekta to a lonely spot by the water. The air was still, the only sound the distant cry of a hawk circling above. When they confronted him, Bekta did not flee. He sat with a quiet, tragic dignity, realizing perhaps that the law of the steppe had finally come for him. He asked only that they spare his younger brother, and then he waited. The arrows flew with a soft whistle through the air, and in that moment Temujin took a step from which there was no returning. He had chosen the cold necessity of power over the warmth of blood. When they returned home, Hoelun met them with a rage that shook the very trees, calling them panthers that kill their own, and dogs that bite their own shadows. She wept for the loss of her son and the hardening of the survivors, but the deed was done. Temujin had claimed his place as the head of the family, and the weight of that decision would remain with him, a cold stone in his heart, for the rest of his days. As the years passed, the legend of the boy who survived in the wilderness began to drift like smoke across the plains, reaching the ears of the Taichi Ud, the very clan that had abandoned them. They feared that the seed they had cast away was growing into a wolf that would one day return to hunt them. They sent a raiding party to find the family, their hoofbeats echoing like thunder against the earth. Temujin, sensing the danger, fled into the dense thickets of the Turgan heights, hiding in the tangled brush where the horses could not follow. For 9 days and nights he crouched in the silence, listening to the wind and the distant shouts of his pursuers. Hunger finally drove him out, and he was captured, his hands bound and his spirit tested once more. The Taichi Ud did not kill him immediately. Instead, they sought to humiliate him, to break the will of the boy who would be king. They placed a heavy wooden collar, known as a kangu, around his neck and wrists. It was a cumbersome, agonizing device that prevented him from feeding himself or lying down in comfort. He became a trophy, paraded from tent to tent, a captive wolf on a leash. Yet even in the grip of the wooden collar, Temujin's eyes remained clear and observant. He watched the rhythms of the camp, the changing of the guards, and the subtle shifts in the loyalties of those who held him. He found a strange, quiet ally in a man named Sorkan Shira, a lowly servant who saw something in the boy's gaze that commanded respect. The opportunity for escape came during a night of celebration when the air was thick with the smell of fermented mare's milk and the sound of boisterous singing. The guards, lulled by the festivities and the perceived helplessness of their prisoner, grew careless. In the moonlit chaos, Temujin struck his guard with the edge of the heavy wooden kang, knocking him senseless. He did not run for the hills, for he knew he would be easily tracked. Instead, he slipped into the freezing waters of the Onon River, submerging his body and leaving only his nose above the surface, hidden among the reeds and the drifting debris. He floated there, a ghost in the water, as the torches of the searching soldiers flickered along the banks. He could hear their frustrated shouts and the splashing of their horses. Sorkan Shira spotted him among the reeds, their eyes meeting in the silver moonlight for a brief, breathless second. The man said nothing, turning the searchers in another direction, choosing to protect the spark of greatness he saw flickering in the dark water. When the camp finally fell into a drunken slumber, Temujin crawled from the river, his limbs blue with cold, and sought refuge in the tent of his silent benefactor. With a heavy hammer, the wooden collar was finally shattered, the splinters falling to the ground like the remnants of his old life. As he rode away into the night on a stolen horse, the wind whipping past his ears, Temujin was no longer just a boy trying to survive. He had been forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered in the ice of the river. The wilderness had been his teacher, and the wooden collar had been his throne of suffering. He looked back one last time at the fires of the Taichi-ud camp, a small cluster of lights in the vast, dark expanse of the world. He knew now that the steppe did not belong to the strongest or the most numerous, but to the one who could endure the longest, the one who could turn the shadow of the Onon River into a shroud for his enemies. The path ahead was still long and shrouded in the mists of the future, but the boy with the blood clot in his hand had learned the most important lesson of all, that to lead, one must first learn to stand alone. The stars above him seemed to burn with a new intensity, mapping out a destiny that stretched far beyond the horizon, toward mountains he had never seen and cities he would one day level to the ground. For now, however, there was only the steady rhythm of the horse's gallop and the deep, rhythmic breathing of a survivor who had finally found his way home to the wild. The scent of crushed wild mint and damp earth rises from the hooves of a lone horse, a fragrance that speaks of ancient promises kept across the vast, rolling green of the Mongolian plateau. Temujin is no longer the starving boy, hiding in the shadows of the Khenti mountains. He is a young man, with a name that carries the weight of his father's legacy, and he is riding toward a pact made long ago in the innocence of childhood. The promise of a bride, Borte, had remained like a steady flame in the back of his mind through all the years of exile and blood. When he finally arrives at the camp of the Ongirat tribe, he finds that the girl he left behind has grown into a woman of remarkable poise and quiet strength. Their marriage is more than a union of two people. It is the first thread in a tapestry of alliances that Temujin will spend the rest of his life weaving. As part of the custom, Borta's family presents him with a magnificent dowry, a coat of black sable, so deep and lustrous that it seems to swallow the light of the afternoon sun. It is a garment fit for a king, a symbol of wealth that could have sustained his family for a lifetime, yet Temujin looks at the fur and sees not warmth for his own shoulders, but a bridge to his future. He takes this precious gift to Togrul, the powerful Khan of the Karaits, who had once been a sworn brother to Temujin's father. By laying the sable coat at the feet of the great Khan, Temujin is not merely showing respect. He is reclaiming a lost inheritance, situating himself under the protection of a formidable patron. This gesture of strategic generosity marks the beginning of his transformation from a fugitive into a diplomat. He understands, perhaps better than any man of his age, that on the steppe, gold and fur are only as valuable as the loyalty they can buy. As the seasons turn and the grass grows tall and golden, Temujin finds himself reunited with another ghost from his past. Jamuka, a charismatic and brilliant young leader from the Jadaran clan, had been his playmate when they were children. In the flickering light of a campfire, under a sky heavy with stars, the two young men decide to renew their bond. They perform the ancient ritual of the Anda, the blood brotherhood. They exchange gifts, a knucklebone, a brass-tipped arrow, and they mingle their blood, swearing an oath that they shall be as one soul in two bodies. For a time they are inseparable. They sleep under the same blanket, they hunt the same wolves, and they dream of a world where the scattered, feuding tribes of the steppe might one day walk the same path. This bond with Jamuka provides Temujin with more than just a friend. It provides him with a military education, as the two young men spend their days perfecting the art of the mounted charge and the feigned retreat, their laughter echoing across the silent valleys. But the peace of the steppe is as fragile as a dragonfly's wing. One night, the silence is shattered by the thunder of hooves and the terrifying cries of the Merkit tribe. They have come in the dark of night to settle an old score, seeking revenge for a kidnapping that occurred a generation ago. In the chaos of the raid, as the tents are torn down and the horses scatter in terror, Borta is taken. The woman who represented Temujin's hope and his new beginning is vanished into the vastness of the north, carried away by men who intend to keep her as a trophy of their vengeance. The loss is a devastating blow that could have broken a lesser man, but for Temujin, it becomes the crucible in which his legendary resolve is forged. He does not act out of blind rage. Instead, he moves with a cold, calculated precision. He calls upon the bonds he has so carefully nurtured. He turns to his blood brother Jamuka and his patron Togrul Khan, asking them to honor their oaths. It is a pivotal moment in history, the first time Temujin assembles a coalition, bringing together disparate groups for a single, focused purpose. The rescue mission is a masterpiece of early steppe warfare. Under the pale light of a waning moon, the combined forces of Temujin, Jamuka, and the Karaites move like a shadow across the landscape. They navigate the marshlands and the dense forests where the Merkits feel most secure, moving with a silence that belies the thousands of riders in their ranks. When the attack finally comes, it is swift and absolute. The Merkit camp is overrun before most can reach for their bows. In the flickering firelight of the burning gers, Temujin rides through the chaos, calling Borta's name into the freezing night air. When he finally finds her, the reunion is not one of grand speeches, but of a quiet, profound relief that ripples through the very earth beneath them. This victory over the Merkits sends a tremor through the nomadic world. Word spreads from campfire to campfire of the young leader who managed to unite rival clans for a common cause. Men who have grown weary of the endless, petty cycles of theft and murder begin to look toward Temujin's banner. They see a man who rewards loyalty with more than just words, a leader who shares the spoils of war equally among his followers, rather than keeping the best for himself. This is a radical departure from the traditions of the steppe aristocracy, and it acts as a magnet for the dispossessed, the brave, and the ambitious. As the months pass, the camp of Temujin begins to swell. New families arrive daily, their carts creaking under the weight of their belongings, their herds of sheep and goats trailing behind them like slow-moving clouds. Among these newcomers are men who will become his most trusted generals, the dogs of war, who will eventually carry his name to the edges of the known world. They are drawn to his charisma, yes, but also to his clarity. Temujin offers a vision of a life governed by law and merit, rather than by the accidents of birth. Yet, as his influence grows, the shadow of his bond with Jamuka begins to lengthen. The two blood brothers, once so perfectly aligned, find themselves standing at a crossroads. Jamuka is a traditionalist, a man who believes in the old ways of the steppe, where the blue-blooded nobility holds all the power. Temujin, tempered by the hardships of his youth, believes that a man's worth should be measured by his skill and his heart. As they ride together at the head of their growing army, the silence between them becomes heavier, filled with the unspoken realization that the steppe is not large enough for two suns to shine at once. The air around them seems to chill, not from the coming winter, but from the shift in the political winds. Every successful hunt, every skirmish won against a rival clan, adds a new layer of tension to their brotherhood. While they still share the same fire and drink from the same cup, the eyes of their followers are constantly comparing them. Jamukha's brilliance is like a flash of lightning, bright, sudden, and terrifying, while Temujin's power is like the steady rising of a tide, slow and impossible to stop. The bonds of blood and brotherhood, which had once been Temujin's greatest strength, are now becoming his greatest challenge. He has learned how to survive the elements, how to win a bride, and how to command an army. Now he must learn the most painful lesson of leadership, that the friends of one's youth can become the rivals of one's maturity. As the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and deep oranges, the young wolf of the steppe watches the flickering embers of the fire, knowing that the warmth of the past is fading, and the cold, bright dawn of an empire is waiting just beyond the next ridge. The sound of a snapping dry branch in the stillness of the forest can carry for miles across the open plains, a sharp reminder that even the deepest bonds can fracture with a single decisive blow. As the unity between the two blood brothers begins to fray, we see a world dividing itself into two distinct visions of the future. On one side stands Jamukha, a man of tradition and ancient lineage, who believes that the right to lead is a gift of the blood, passed down through the generations of the noble born. To Jamukha, the social order is a sacred architecture that must be preserved at all costs, where every man knows his place by the name of his ancestors. But Temujin, having tasted the bitter dust of abandonment and the cold reality of survival, sees the world through a different lens. He looks not at a man's father, but at the strength of his arm and the loyalty in his heart. This philosophical rift grows like a slow-moving river, carving through stone, widening until the two friends find themselves standing on opposite banks. Temujin begins to attract the outcasts, the second sons, and the common herders who have nothing but their skills to offer. He promises them a world where a man can rise as high as his courage will take him, a meritocracy that feels revolutionary in the 12th century. Meanwhile, Jamukha gathers the aristocrats and the established chieftains, those who fear that Temujin's new way of life will wash away their status like a summer flood. The tension between them is no longer just a personal grievance. It is a clash between the old world and a new, terrifyingly efficient order that is just beginning to take shape. The inevitable collision finally occurs in the year 1187 at a place known as Dalan Balshut, the Marsh of the 70 Springs. The air is thick with the scent of damp earth and the nervous sweat of horses as the two armies face one another. It is a brutal, chaotic engagement, and for the first time in his long journey, Temujin is soundly defeated. Jamukha's superior numbers and traditional tactics crush the burgeoning forces of his former friend, forcing Temujin to retreat into the shadows of the mountains. But it is not the battle itself that history remembers most vividly. It is what happened in the silence after the fighting stopped. In an act of legendary cruelty designed to shatter the spirit of his rivals, Jamukha orders 70 large bronze cauldrons to be filled with water and brought to a boil. One by one, the captured leaders of Temujin's loyal followers are cast into the bubbling vats. The steam rises into the cold mountain air, carrying with it a message of absolute terror. Jamukha believes that by displaying such horrific brutality, he will cement his power and ensure that no one ever dares to follow the low-born Temujin again. He wants to prove that the old ways are backed by an iron fist, but in his arrogance, he miscalculates the heart of the steppe. Instead of inspiring submission, the smoke from those 70 cauldrons carries the scent of a tyrant, turning the stomachs of even his own allies and casting Temujin in the light of a tragic, resilient hero. Following this devastating loss, Temujin vanishes from the historical record for nearly a decade, a period of silence that historians often call his missing years. It is a time of quiet rebuilding, a long winter of the soul where he moves through the borderlands of the Jin dynasty, perhaps serving as a mercenary or a quiet observer of more advanced civilizations. During these years, he is like a fire being banked for the night, glowing low and steady beneath a layer of ash, waiting for the right moment to be fanned back into a flame. He studies the way cities are governed, the way large bureaucracies manage thousands of people, and the way technology can be harnessed to overcome sheer numbers. He is no longer just a warrior, he is becoming a student of the world. While he is away from the spotlight of history, Temujin experiments with new ways of coordinating human effort across the vast, lonely distances of the grasslands. He understands that in the heat of battle, the greatest enemy is often confusion. To solve this, he turns to the sky. He develops a sophisticated system of smoke signals, where different colors and thicknesses of smoke can relay complex commands from one ridge to another faster than any horse can gallop. In the daylight, the dark plumes rise like ink against the blue. At night, flaming arrows and lanterns serve as his silent messengers. This is the birth of a psychological warfare that makes his growing army seem omnipresent, as if the very wind is carrying his orders to every soldier at once. He also begins to master the art of the feint and the psychological trap. He teaches his men to ride with extra horses, sometimes 5 or 6 for every single rider, so that when they move across the horizon, the dust clouds they kick up suggest an army 10 times their actual size. He instructs his warriors to tie bundles of brush to their horses' tails, dragging them along the ground to create a suffocating haze that masks their movements and unnerves their enemies. To an observer, standing on a distant hill, it looks as though the earth itself has risen up to march alongside the young Khan. These are not just tricks of the trade, they are the foundations of a military machine that values intelligence and deception over the blunt force of a frontal assault. As the years of his exile draw to a close, Temujin begins to re-emerge, not as the desperate refugee he once was, but as a calculated architect of power. He slowly gathers his scattered people, moving through the valleys like a shadow, whispering promises of a different kind of life. He speaks of a law that applies to the Khan and the commoner alike, a code of conduct that will eventually become the great Yasa. He finds that the memory of the boiling cauldrons has not faded. Instead, it has become a rallying cry for those who seek a leader who values loyalty over lineage. The people of the steppe are tired of the endless cycle of blood feuds and petty kings. They are looking for a pole star to guide them through the dark. The landscape of the Mongolian plateau is vast and indifferent, a sea of grass that swallows the stories of 1,000 forgotten tribes, but the name of Temujin begins to resonate with a new frequency. He spends his evenings sitting by the small fires of his scouts, listening to the reports of Jamukha's growing instability. He learns that the aristocrats are beginning to bicker, their egos clashing in the absence of a common enemy to hate. Temujin, by contrast, has spent his time in the wilderness forging a core of organs, his most trusted companions who are bound to him not by blood, but by an unbreakable oath of brotherhood. These men are the iron pillars of his future empire, and they have been tested in the fires of defeat until they are as hard as the steel of their own swords. The air on the steppe is beginning to turn cold again, the short summer giving way to the crisp, golden hues of autumn. The marmots are retreating into their burrows, and the migratory birds are forming long V's in the sky, heading south toward warmer lands. But for Temujin, the season of hiding is over. He has learned how to turn a loss into a lesson, and how to use the very fear his enemies created as a weapon against them. The boy who once hid in the marshes to escape his captors is gone, replaced by a man who understands that power is not just about winning a battle, but about winning the imagination of the people. As the first frost of the season patterns the grass in delicate white crystals, the wolf of the steppe begins his long, steady walk back toward the center of the world, ready to reclaim his destiny from the hands of the past. The scent of scorched earth and old iron lingers in the air, but beneath it there is the smell of turning soil and the damp, sweet promise of rain. It is the year 1202, and Temujin is no longer merely a survivor. He is a force of nature, moving with the quiet inevitability of a glacier. The Tatars, the very people who had poisoned his father and cast a long dark shadow over his childhood, now stand across the field. For generations, the Tatars had been the favored pawns of the Jin dynasty, kept wealthy and arrogant to ensure the steppe tribes remained divided. But the wheel of fortune has turned. In a series of swift, decisive strikes, Temujin breaks their power, not just through the strength of his cavalry, but through a radical new vision of society. In the past, the spoils of war were the private property of the aristocrats, the high-born Khans who watched the fighting from the safety of the rear. Temujin changes this forever. He decrees that the plunder will be shared among his warriors and the families of the fallen, ensuring that the poorest widow in his camp has a stake in his victory. This act of profound generosity shatters the old tribal loyalties, binding the common people to him with threads of gratitude more durable than any bloodline. The Tatars are absorbed, their identity folded into the rising tide of his followers, as the old world of hereditary privilege begins to crumble like dry clay. As the years pass, the horizon widens, and the great powers of the steppe begin to realize that the wind is blowing from a new direction. To the west lie the Naimans, a sophisticated and powerful people, and to the south the Kereyits, once Temujin's allies under the leadership of the aging Ong Khan. The politics of the steppe are like the shifting sands of the Gobi, and soon the bonds of old friendships begin to fray. Through a landscape of high mountain passes and endless rolling grasslands, Temujin leads his men with a tactical brilliance that seems almost supernatural. He uses smoke and mirrors, quite literally, ordering each of his soldiers to light 5 campfires at night so that his army appears 5 times larger than it truly is. He moves with a silence that unnerves his enemies, his riders appearing like ghosts out of the morning mist. One by one, the great strongholds of the Naimans and the Kereyits fall. It is not just a conquest of land, but a conquest of the mind. As more and more people realize that under Temujin's rule, there is a strange new thing called order. There is a law that applies to the high and the low alike, and a peace that allows a traveler to carry a golden platter from one end of his domain to the other without fear of robbery. Yet even as his power grows, a heavy sorrow settles in the center of his heart. Jamuka, his blood brother, the boy who had played with him on the frozen Onon River and shared his first dreams of the future, has become his greatest rival. Their relationship is a tragic tapestry of love and betrayal, a bond so strong that it can only be broken by death. Jamuka represents the old way, the way of the steppe aristocrats, of ancient lineages and the pride of the high-born. He cannot accept a world where a commoner can rise to power through merit alone. After years of skirmishes and cat-and-mouse games across the wilderness, Jamuka is finally betrayed by his own men and brought before Temujin. The air in the tent is thick with the weight of their shared history. Temujin offers his old friend a chance to reconcile, to stand beside him once more as his shadow. But Jamuka, with a dignity that commands respect even in defeat, refuses. He knows that there can be only one sun in the sky. He asks for an honorable death, one that does not spill his blood upon the earth, so that his spirit may remain intact. And so, with a heavy heart and a silence that echoes through the camp, Temujin grants his brother's final wish. The bond is severed, and as Jamukha's spirit departs for the eternal blue sky, the last obstacle to the unification of the tribes is removed. The year is 1206, and the air is crisp and clear as the tribes gather for a Kurultai, a great assembly at the headwaters of the Onon River. It is a sight that the steppe has never seen before. Thousands upon thousands of white felt tents stretch across the valley like a sea of fallen clouds. The banners of 100 different clans flutter in the breeze, but they all face a single point. In the center of this vast gathering stands a white spirit banner with 9 yak tails, representing the soul of the people. Here, amidst the chanting of shamans and the low, rhythmic thrumming of drums, Temujin is proclaimed Genghis Khan, the universal ruler. The name itself carries the echo of the ocean, a vast and limitless power that encompasses all things. He stands before them not as a king of a single tribe, but as the leader of the people of the felt tents, a nation forged from the fragments of a dozen warring factions. The old divisions of Mongol, Merkit, and Tatar are being slowly erased, replaced by a single unified identity. As the sun dips low, casting long golden shadows across the gathered multitude, Genghis Khan looks out over the faces of his people. He sees the hardened warriors who have followed him through the darkest valleys, the mothers who have kept the hearths burning, and the children who will grow up in a world transformed. He speaks of the great law, the yasa, which will govern their lives with a strict but fair hand. He speaks of religious tolerance, of the protection of merchants, and of the sacred duty of every Mongol to the community. The atmosphere is one of profound stillness, a collective holding of breath as a new era begins. The scattered sparks of the steppe have been gathered into a single roaring flame. The boy who was once abandoned by his own kin has become the father of a nation, and the horizon, once a wall that hemmed him in, has become a doorway to the rest of the world. The night falls gently over the Onon River, the water murmuring secrets to the stones, as it has for 1,000 years. Inside the tents, the people sleep with a sense of security they have never known. The constant raids and the midnight terrors of the past are fading into memory. The horses graze quietly in the moonlight, their breath huffing in little clouds of silver vapor. Genghis Khan sits alone for a moment, looking up at the eternal blue sky, the Tengri that has guided his path through the wilderness. He knows that the work of unification is only the beginning. To the south and the west, great empires sit behind high stone walls, unaware that the wind is changing. They do not yet know that the wolf has emerged from the forest, and that the world is about to be remade in the image of the steppe. The silence of the night is absolute, broken only by the distant, lonely cry of a crane, a sound that seems to carry the weight of all the history yet to be written. The felt tents are warm, the fires have settled into glowing embers, and for this brief moment the entire world seems to be at peace, resting before the storm that will soon carry the name of the Mongols to the ends of the earth. A single rhythmic beat begins to pulse across the plains, not the frantic drumming of war, but the steady, measured thrum of a machine that never sleeps. It is the sound of 1,000 hooves striking the earth in perfect synchronicity, a cadence that reflects a new kind of order emerging from the ancient chaos of the high plateau. Imagine, if you will, the intricate workings of a clock, where every gear and every spring, no matter how small, has a vital purpose and a designated place. This was the vision Temujin brought to his people, a transformation of the nomadic spirit into a singular, unbreakable force of will. The foundation of this new world was built upon the simple, elegant logic of 10. In the old days, loyalty was a tangled web of cousins and uncles, of blood feuds and shifting tribal whims that could vanish like mist at the first sign of hardship. But the great Khan replaced the messy ties of kinship with the iron clarity of the decimal system. At the smallest level was the Arban, a group of 10 men who lived together, ate together, and fought as one. They were more than comrades. They were brothers by decree, responsible for one another's lives and conduct. If one fled, all were punished. If one showed courage, the glory was shared by all. 10 of these groups formed the Zun, a company of 100. 10 companies became the Miangan, a regiment of 1,000. And at the peak of this soaring pyramid sat the Tumen, 10,000 riders, a self-sufficient army capable of swallowing the horizon. This structure allowed a single command, whispered in the tent of the Khan, to ripple outward with perfect fidelity until it reached the furthest scout on the edge of the world. It was a language of numbers that everyone understood, turning a sprawling mass of individuals into a living, breathing organism that moved with the grace of a predator. As the structure of the army took shape, so too did the structure of society, bound together by a code known as the Yasa. It was not merely a list of prohibitions, but a philosophy of survival carved into the very soul of the Mongol people. In a land where water was more precious than gold, and a stolen horse could mean a slow death in the snow, the Yasa brought a profound, almost eerie sense of security. It is said that at the height of the empire's peace, a young woman carrying a golden nugget on her head could walk from one end of the realm to the other without fear of harm. The law was absolute. It protected the traveller, the merchant, and the common herder alike. It forbade the polluting of running water, for the rivers were the veins of the earth. It mandated hospitality, ensuring that no stranger would ever go hungry in the vastness of the steppe. This was the great peace, a stillness that settled over the grasslands, where the strength of the Khan's law acted as a shield for the weak and a leash for the powerful. While the Yasa provided the soul of the empire, its nervous system was being forged in the dust of the great trade routes. This was the Yam, the postal system of the arrow riders. Picture a lonely outpost on a high, wind-swept ridge where a fresh horse stands saddled and waiting, its breath blooming in the cold morning air. In the distance, a faint cloud of dust appears. A rider approaches at a full gallop, the bells on his belt jingling a warning to the station keepers. Without even touching the ground, the messenger leaps from his exhausted mount onto the back of the fresh one, clutching a satchel of leather-bound dispatches. Within seconds, he is gone again, a blur of motion vanishing into the shimmering heat of the desert or the shadows of the mountain pass. These riders could cover over 200 miles in a single day, carrying news of uprisings, weather, or diplomatic overtures across distances that would take a merchant caravan months to traverse. The world began to shrink. For the first time in history, the East and the West were connected by a thread of constant, rapid communication. The Khan knew what was happening in the forests of the north and the cities of the south almost as soon as it occurred, his mind reaching out across thousands of miles like a spider sensing the slightest vibration in its web. And yet, for all their mastery of the horse and the bow, the Mongols understood that the world beyond the steppe was guarded by stone and fire. The great Khan possessed a rare and quiet wisdom, the ability to recognize what he did not know. He looked upon the towering walls of foreign cities not with frustration, but with a cold, analytical curiosity. As his influence expanded, he began to gather the greatest minds of the age to his side. He did not execute the scholars, the architects, or the alchemists of the lands he moved through. Instead, he invited them into his service. Persian engineers who understood the mathematics of the catapult, Chinese masters of gunpowder and siege engines, doctors who knew the secrets of herbs and the movements of the stars. They were integrated into the Mongol war machine, creating a diverse core of specialists that transformed the nomadic army into a modern, technological juggernaut. The sound of the steppe was no longer just the whistling of the wind or the lowing of cattle. It was now joined by the rhythmic clanging of hammers on anvils and the scratching of quills on parchment. In the shadow of the felt tents, men from a dozen different cultures worked side by side, sharing their secrets under the watchful eye of the Mongol officers. They developed massive crossbows that could shatter gates from a distance, and traction trebuchets that could rain stones down upon the most formidable fortresses. This integration of foreign technology was seamless and pragmatic. The Mongols were not interested in imposing their own way of life on the people they encountered. They were interested in what worked. If a bridge needed to be built over a raging river, they used the best bridge builders in the world. If a city needed to be governed, they employed the most experienced administrators. This flexibility was their greatest strength, a willingness to learn and adapt that allowed a people who had never seen a permanent building to become the masters of the most sophisticated civilizations on Earth. As the night deepens, we can imagine the campfires of this vast, diverse host stretching out toward the horizon like a second galaxy of stars fallen to the Earth. There is a sense of profound quiet industry here. In one tent, a scholar translates an ancient text by the light of a tallow candle. In another, a group of soldiers cleans their leather armor with animal fat, the scent heavy and rich in the still air. The iron discipline of the Khan has created a space where order thrives, where the chaos of the past has been smoothed away by the steady hand of the law. The soldiers of the decimal unit sleep soundly, knowing that their brothers are watching over them, and that the yam riders are even now racing through the darkness to bring word of the coming dawn. The air is cool and carries the faint, sweet smell of wild thyme and dried grass. It is a peaceful moment, yet beneath it lies the weight of an unstoppable momentum. The machine is built. The laws are set. The messengers are in flight. The world is no longer a collection of fragmented tribes and isolated kingdoms. It is becoming a single interconnected entity, held together by the vision of one man who rose from the dust to command the wind. We linger here for a moment, in this space between the old world and the new, listening to the soft breathing of the camp and the distant, steady rhythm of the night patrol. The iron discipline is not just a tool of war, but a promise of a new kind of stability, a quiet strength that will soon echo through the halls of history long after the fires have faded to ash. The scent of dry sage and ancient dust begins to shift, replaced by the sharp metallic tang of the southern winds, as the focus of the great Khan turns toward the horizon, where the grass finally ends. For centuries, the Great Wall had stood as a silent stone sentinel, a jagged spine of rock and brick designed to keep the world of the steppe separate from the world of the city. But to Temujin, it is not a barrier so much as a threshold. The nomadic mind does not see a wall as an end, but rather as a question to be answered with patience and iron. The journey southward begins not with a roar, but with a steady, rhythmic march across the Gobi Desert, a vast expanse of singing sands and shifting heat where the very air seems to vibrate with the memory of forgotten oceans. It is a landscape that would break a lesser army, yet the Mongols move through it with the ease of shadows passing over a dune. They carry their world with them, their horses finding moisture in the sparse scrub, and their riders finding direction in the stars that hang like cold diamonds in the desert sky. As they emerge from the dust of the Gobi, the lush, walled heart of the Jin dynasty reveals itself, a civilization of soaring pagodas, silken tapestries, and the formidable city of Zhongdu, the place we now know as Beijing. The siege of Zhongdu is a slow, deliberate unfolding of destiny. Here, the wolf of the steppe encounters something his ancestors never had to master, the stubborn, unmoving strength of stone and mortar. The city is a fortress of immense proportions, its walls thick enough for chariots to pass one another, and its gates reinforced with iron. To a traditional horseman, such a place is a labyrinth of frustration, but Temujin is no longer merely a horseman. He is a student of the world. He gathers engineers from the lands he has conquered, men who understand the mathematics of gravity and the temperament of wood and tension. Under the watchful eyes of the Mongol commanders, great catapults are constructed, their heavy arms swinging with a rhythmic thud that echoes through the night, hurling stones and fire into the heart of the imperial capital. There is a strange, quiet beauty in the way the nomadic spirit adapts to this stationary war. The soldiers, used to the infinite freedom of the open plains, now sit in the shadow of the great walls, waiting with a patience that is as heavy as the earth itself. They learn the art of the blockade, choking off the veins of trade and supply until the city begins to breathe more slowly, its internal fires dimming as the months stretch into a year. When Zhongdu finally falls in the year 1215, it is not just a military victory. It is the moment the world realizes that no wall is high enough to stop the shifting of the tides. The treasures of the Jinn, the delicate porcelains, the scrolls of philosophy, and the intricate mechanisms of clockwork begin to flow northward, back into the felt tents of the high plateau, creating a bridge between two worlds that had never truly touched before. As the years pass and the empire breathes and expands, the Khan's gaze stretches further west, across the high mountains and into the sophisticated heart of the Khwarezmian Empire. This is a land of turquoise domes and bustling marketplaces, where the Silk Road hums with the music of 1,000 languages. Initially, Temujin seeks not conquest, but commerce. He sends a caravan of 500 men, laden with gifts of silver, silk, and camels, carrying a message of peace and a desire for trade. But history is often steered by the pride of men who do not see the storm until it is upon them. The governor of the border city of Otrar, suspicious and perhaps overconfident in his own strength, seizes the caravan and executes the ambassadors, an insult that ripples back to the Mongol heartland like a crack of thunder in a silent valley. The response is a masterclass in calculated, relentless movement. The Khan does not simply attack. He orchestrates a symphony of destruction that spans thousands of miles. He divides his forces, sending them through the treacherous mountain passes of the Pamirs, over snow-capped peaks, where the air is thin and the silence is absolute. They appear before the cities of Transoxiana, Bukhara, Samarkand, and Merv, not as a single army, but as a ghost-like presence that seems to be everywhere at once. The fall of the Khwarezmian Empire is swift and absolute, a reminder that the hospitality of the steppe, once broken, is replaced by a cold and methodical justice. In the gardens of Samarkand, where the scent of roses and ripening apricots once filled the evening air, the atmosphere changes to one of quiet, somber reflection. The Mongols, who had lived their lives in the simplicity of the yurt, suddenly find themselves the masters of the most sophisticated urban centers in the world. They do not destroy for the sake of destruction. They dismantle the old structures to build something vast and unprecedented. They spare the artisans, the architects, and the physicians, sending them across the continent to share their knowledge, weaving the disparate threads of human achievement into a single massive tapestry. The sheer scale of this new reality is difficult for the human mind to fully grasp. From the grey, churning waves of the Pacific Ocean to the sun-drenched shores of the Caspian Sea, a single law now prevails. It is the Pax Mongolica, a period of forced but profound peace where a traveller could carry a golden tablet from one end of the continent to the other without fear of harm. The world becomes smaller, more intimate. A merchant in Tabriz might wear silk woven in Hangzhou, while a scholar in Karakorum studies a map drawn by a Persian astronomer. This is the legacy of the boy who once hid in the tall grass of the Onon River, a world where the horizons have been pushed back until they meet on the other side. The empire is no longer just a collection of tribes. It is a living, breathing organism that spans nearly the entire breadth of the known world. The steady clip-clop of the postal relays, the yam system, creates a heartbeat for this vast body, with riders covering hundreds of miles a day to deliver messages across the steppes and deserts. It is a quiet, rhythmic pulse that ensures the Khan's will is felt in every corner of his domain. As the night settles over this immense expanse of land, from the frozen forests of Siberia to the warm river valleys of the south, there is a sense of a world held in a single powerful hand. We can imagine the Khan now, an older man, sitting outside his tent on the edge of a great plain. The fire before him crackles softly, casting long dancing shadows against the felt walls of his home. He does not look back with regret, but with the calm satisfaction of a weaver who has finished a monumental work. The stars above are the same stars he saw as a child, but the world beneath them has been irrevocably changed. The boundaries of nations have blurred, the old gods have met new ones, and the wind that blows across the steppe now carries with it the sense of a dozen different civilizations, all mingled together in the cool evening air. The smell of damp earth and crushed sage clings to the air as the great Khan leads his warriors south one final time, a familiar scent that has followed him from the cradle to the edge of the world. It is the year 1227, and the western Shia have once again defied the shadow of the eagle, drawing the old conqueror away from the stillness of his homeland. But this campaign feels different. There is a weight in the atmosphere, a quiet understanding that the threads of fate are beginning to pull tight. As he sits by the low-burning fires of the camp, his eyes rest upon the distant horizon, watching the flickering spirits of the stars. He has always been a man of premonitions, a listener to the whispers of the eternal blue sky, and now the sky seems to be whispering of home, not the home of silk-lined tents or marble palaces, but the silent, stony embrace of the mountain where his journey truly began. A fall from his horse during a winter hunt leaves him weakened, the physical vessel finally beginning to fray after decades of tireless movement. Yet, even as his strength wanes, his mind remains as sharp as the edge of a well-honed saber. He issues his final commands with a clarity that belies his fading breath, ensuring that the empire he built, the largest contiguous land mass ever governed by a single hand, will remain stitched together by the laws he carved into the hearts of his people. He speaks of the need for unity, of the dangers of pride, and of the simple truth that a single arrow is easily broken, but a bundle of many is invincible. As the summer heat begins to soften into the first cool breaths of autumn, the great Khan closes his eyes for the last time, drifting away as quietly as a shadow retreating from the sun. The return journey to the north is a procession of absolute silence, a ghost march across the vast rolling hills. Legend tells us that the funeral escort was sworn to a secrecy so profound it bordered on the sacred. Every living soul encountered on the path back to the Mongolian heartland was put to the sword, not out of cruelty, but to ensure that no human tongue could ever betray the location of the Khan's final rest. They were moving toward Burkhan Khaldun, the sacred mountain of his youth, the place where he once hid from his enemies in the thickets, and where he later stood in prayer, offering his belt and his hat to the sky. It is said that once the body was lowered into the earth, 1,000 horsemen trampled the ground until it was as flat and featureless as the surrounding plains. Then, a forest was planted over the site, or perhaps a river was diverted to wash away all trace of the disturbance, leaving only the wind and the trees to stand guard over the man who once shook the world. Even now, centuries later, the secret of his tomb remains locked within the mountain's stony chest. Archaeologists and historians have searched the rugged terrain of the Khenti Mountains, peering through the foliage and scanning the soil, but the earth refuses to yield its prize. This silence is perhaps his final victory. A return to the anonymity of the wilderness, where the great Khan becomes one with the landscape he loved so dearly. He did not wish for a towering monument of stone or a gilded mausoleum that would eventually crumble into dust. He chose the permanence of the mountain itself, an eternal, unmoving sentinel that requires no upkeep and fears no passage of time. But while his physical form lay hidden in the shadow of the peaks, the world he left behind was vibrating with a new, frantic energy. This was the beginning of the Pax Mongolica, a period of unprecedented peace and connectivity that stretched from the shores of the Yellow Sea to the gates of Eastern Europe. For the first time in human history, a traveller could carry a golden tablet of authority and walk from one end of the continent to the other without fear of bandits or local warlords. The Silk Road, once a treacherous and fragmented series of paths, became a high-speed artery of culture and commerce. Caravans laden with cinnamon, ginger, and precious cloves moved westward, while silver, glassware, and horses flowed toward the east. It was a time of great mingling, a grand conversation between civilizations that had previously existed in total isolation. In the bustling markets of Tabriz and the quiet scriptoriums of Karakorum, ideas were traded as freely as tea or silk. Knowledge of paper-making, printing, and gunpowder began to seep across borders, forever altering the course of human development. Persian doctors shared their understanding of anatomy with Chinese herbalists, and astronomers from the far corners of the empire gathered to map the movements of the planets with startling precision. The Khan had created a world where the only thing that mattered was one's skill and loyalty. A meritocracy that allowed the best minds of the age to flourish, regardless of their faith or their origin. This cultural exchange was the true legacy of the Mongol era, a bridge built of hoof prints and ink that connected the fragmented pieces of the medieval world into a singular, breathing whole. As the centuries drifted by, the great cities he founded were reclaimed by the sands, and the borders of his empire were redrawn by the hands of new kings and emperors. The thunder of the Mongol cavalry faded into the echoes of history, becoming the stuff of campfire tales and dusty chronicles. But if you were to stand today on the high plateaus of the Mongolian steppe, you would find that the essence of his world has not truly vanished. The grass still ripples like the waves of a green ocean under the infinite blue of the sky. The air is still sharp and clean, carrying the distant neigh of a horse or the faint, rhythmic thrum of a nomad's song. The landscape remains indifferent to the rise and fall of nations. It is a place of deep, resonant stillness that feels as though it has been waiting since the dawn of time. The wind that brushes against the slopes of Burkan Khaldun is the same wind that once filled the lungs of the boy named Temujin. It moves through the larch trees and over the jagged rocks, whispering through the tall grass in a language that needs no translation. It tells a story of a life lived with a singular, burning intensity, a journey from the lowest depths of poverty to the highest peaks of power. It is a reminder that even the most monumental changes in human history are, in the end, just ripples on the surface of a much deeper, more ancient pond. The mountains do not remember the names of the men who walked beneath them, but they feel the weight of their footsteps, and in that quiet, heavy presence, the spirit of the wolf of the steppe lives on. The stars are beginning to wheel slowly overhead, marking the passage of another night on the great plains. The world is vast, so much larger than any one person can ever truly know, and yet There is a comfort in this vastness, a sense of belonging to something that stretches far beyond the limits of our own brief lives. As the coolness of the evening settles over the earth, we can imagine the great Khan resting in his hidden chamber, lulled by the heartbeat of the mountain. There is no more need for the bow or the saddle, only the long rhythmic